Welcome back. Finally, we've been able to get rid of some audio glitches, and we're ready to interview Dr. Odelya Kraybill. She is the founder of Expressive Trauma Integration and has developed a system of 6 steps towards trauma integration that we're going to discuss today from her standpoint. How are you doing today, Odelya?
I'm well, thank you. How are you, Darren?
I'm good, thanks. So, just to start out, we won't get into any storytelling around trauma, but let's just use a framework of a trauma happens to somebody. Can you
Mm-hmm.
give us your clinical perspective of what an acute reaction looks like?
Well, trauma response to everyone is biological. It's pretty much the same. It crosses borders and genders, identity, whatever. We respond instinctually. We don't really choose how we respond. And there is in the triune brain, which is a theory of how the brain is divided, there are 3 parts of the brain. So the third part of the brain is the brainstem, the instinctual brain, and it takes over everything. It takes over our cognitions, our rationale, and that's how we really don't get to choose how we respond to trauma.
Okay.
Most of us freeze, even instinctually. Even the people that fight, even the people that flight, we freeze. And these are the stagnated moments that are the terror, the terrifying milliseconds, seconds, minutes, however long the trauma continues. These are this is the moments of pain that later on we're struggling, or we as therapists are trying to assist clients to create some movement in these frozen, stagnated memories that are so much engraved in different layers of our systems. And the layers are not just physical or emotional or cognitive, they're also spiritual, and they affect every aspect of our being, from our health, mental health, emotional health, communications with others, relationships, goes on and on and on. And if we don't treat it at some point or another, and it's not because I wish it for anyone, it's because trauma surface at some point.
Yeah.
Because we get, yeah.
Yeah. So the frozen states that you're describing, is that what, basically in a nutshell, what we'd call post-traumatic stress disorder?
For some people don't have PTSD.
Okay.
Some people would just have not just, but would have post-trauma symptoms, and they could be destructive as well, because the more trauma we experience, it becomes cumulative and more complex. So you don't need to suffer or to be under any kind of particular diagnosis to experience the pain and the suffering that trauma can cause.
Okay. Okay. With that layering of trauma in a cumulative manner, so an initial trauma would be an injury. That's how we're trying to look at it these days. An initial
Mm-hmm.
injury, and then the accumulative effect is injury upon injury upon injury. Is that
Absolutely,
okay?
yeah. So think about every other object
Yeah.
that you bruise it more and more and more and more. It somehow it loses a lot in these bruises or injuries. It also gains new formation and new strength and new abilities to respond to these injuries.
Uh huh.
So the accumulation of the stress and the trauma and the pain is one part of the spectrum. The other part of the spectrum is the strength and all these resources that emerge in these moments of stress and suffering and injuries.
Okay. Those moments, the moments that are from what you're saying are resiliency builders is kind of how I look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So the outcomes that are positive, I tend to think that we're so busy looking at the negative aspects that we forget that there's a positive aspect to our experience as well.
I'm not sure if it's forget. It's just sometimes so painful that it's just difficult to see the light or to experience the strength and we need a lot of help and someone to take us from within ourselves and being able to look at ourselves or at our experiences from a side, which is what therapy is supposed to do, and see that experiencing pain does not necessarily mean that we're not strong. On the contrary,
Right.
enduring pain and being able to experience the pain requires a lot of strength, and not everyone can actually deal with that, and the ability to deal with a traumatic experience, and some of us would become dissociated. This would be our strength mechanism. Some of us will experience different symptoms of depression or OCD or many different kind of what we would call symptoms. These would be just symptoms, but the root core would be a trauma that was not processed properly.
Okay. So then getting stuck in that cycle of not being able to, like you say, have that trauma work itself out through a process in the body to resolution. Mm-hmm. And that resolution point is what you would consider integration of the experience. Is that correct?
Exactly. And the reason that they call it trauma integration and not recovery or healing or reversing or whatever else is because we, in order to work on trauma integration, it's not a one-time therapy setting. It's not one kind of therapy. It's an holistic approach on working on different dimensions of our being, changing our diet and nutrition, the way that we look at things from the cognitive and behavioral aspects, working with the body and embodied therapies, working on sensory integration, gaining a lot of knowledge, and as important is re-narrating the traumatic experiences as one of our stories or several of the stories of our entire self.
Okay. That makes great sense. Thanks. Let's go directly to your model. The only other question that I would have about it, about a trauma experience is what we're hearing is best practice and best outcomes. Any therapeutic interventions need to be individualized for the person, and like you say, holistic and specific to the individual, and that therapy, so to speak, is about somebody holding space for you to help you work through a transition process, a transformation process to trauma integration.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So give us your first. I love your model, by the way.
Thanks.
I really appreciate this model. So let's talk about initial intervention. What we're hearing is the sooner we get to this following a traumatic experience, the better. Would you agree with that?
Depending, some kind of intervention, not therapy, but an intervention needs to take place. As soon as possible after trauma, and that intervention would be focusing on grounding and providing information.
Okay, so let's talk about that grounding step.
It varies. There are many different kinds of approaches. The one that I am using is it's again, as you said, it's all very much context related and client centered.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the person. But what I see that most people need is either grounding from and relaxation, or the opposite.
Okay.
The opposite would be externalizing and intensifying physical activity, like jumping and breathing at the same time. Jumping very fast for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and then shaking the entire body, and then taking deep breath with different, it will be more or less taking deep breath in and then breath out. And that reset, this is like a reset exercise that brings back the first part of the brain, the cognition and the rationale. And then after a person is able to feel more grounded, and that, of course, after we assume safety, that these people, whoever it is, has they're safe, then we can provide information and normalcy of what is happening to them. And of course, what happened to them is the abnormal of the normal, but somehow what they experience is what everyone else experiences in different setting when we experience trauma,
Right.
if it makes sense.
Yeah, so you're saying that the trauma happens, that is unique in terms of individual experience.
That's also subjective, yes.
Right.
Yes.
But the physiological and nervous system response for all of us is pretty much the same.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And providing that information, from my experience, is 50% of the therapeutic process, really.
Oh, okay. So like getting it to a normalized understanding.
Most people don't really normalize their circumstances at that point,
Okay.
but they realize that what they're experiencing is expected.
Okay. Yeah.
Because they in the midst of something that is traumatic, then it's pretty difficult to make sense of it all. But part of the rationale is that there is a reason for that. It's kind of a defense mechanism where we're going into withdrawal to protect ourselves from whatever just happened.
Right.
So under realizing that and allowing the person to say, now it's going to take some time. Now it's not the time to process. It's not the time to tell your story again and again and again and again and create some kind of narrative of what happened. Because there will be time for that. Okay. Now it's time to focus on sensory integration and self-regulation, and get as much information as possible, and try to reconnect to a support system around people that are loved ones, and this is where we begin the process of post-traumatic growth.
Okay.
But it takes a long time, and I think that one of the reasons, like I see many people are going back to withdrawal again and again and again, or even more. Many people and communities stay in the stage of withdrawal, which is the third stage in the model, the framework that I'm working with. Is because they don't have that information.
Okay, so let's move on to the second stage then. After grounding, the psychoeducation component.
That's what that's the information that's very critical, to provide information of what is trauma, what happens to us biologically in trauma, and what should we expect, and what do we do, what should we not do, what are the things that, how can we self-sustain ourselves from here on, and it's very important to work with someone from that stage and start figuring out the things that work, which is pretty interesting, because what works today might not work tomorrow.
Sure. Yeah.
And since not everyone has the ability to get proper therapy or get proper support, this information is important to be out there for anyone that just experienced trauma. The thing is that how will they get access to it?
Right.
So it's systemic.
Yeah.
It's a systemic issue that we as clinicians or as service providers have the responsibility to spread out the information as much as possible, and so people in need would really get access as soon as possible.
Okay, excellent. So the stages then, as I'm understanding so far, is to provide safety initially and allow for stabilization as best as we can. And that's something that's taught and coached and discussed, and things are worked out. And then the grounding is about teaching basically nervous system reset skills.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mostly it's self-regulation and sensory integration activities. Yeah, and the psychoeducation is also although it's not something that you would necessarily do with someone that just experienced trauma, because they're not triggered. They were just experiencing something.
Right.
But as life will go on, they will begin to experience at some point or another. It could take years.
Yeah.
They will be triggered by something that was engraved in their nervous system in the time of the trauma. Some smell, some sight, some taste, even a movement
Yeah.
that would trigger that, and it's important for them to know that and to work with someone that can help them work on an embodied way.
Yeah.
And then to rework, which is later on. That will be stage number 5. Later on would be working with a therapist. Anyway, I'm going ahead. So
No, that's okay.
so
Yeah, the psychoeducation and grounding component then, and probably throughout all of this, it's a dynamic process.
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is very dynamic. Yeah,
You're switching back and forth between the stages all the time.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Stage number 3 is CBRs, which is what I believe is one of the reasons why people are not able to sustain themselves on long term without being in therapy. And this is because we as clinicians are failing to give proper skills and education to our clients that they will be able to sustain themselves on a long-term basis. And I mean for a few years at least.
Right, and that's the self-care education.
It is. It's not just education. It's from day one when a client comes, we begin to give homework, and they start working on what works and what doesn't work. What do I do when this doesn't work?
Yeah.
It also it continues to work on sensory integration.
Yeah.
And realizing where are my strengths, what am I leaning to? Like, I'm the kind of person that lean towards working, intensifying exercise in order to feel more relaxed. Other people need more mindfulness, or I need both. When do I need both? When does it work? Integrate nutrition, just reducing caffeine and sugar from one's diet would reduce their cortisol and dopamine response to stress.
Okay.
Or accumulative stress, and that's major.
Yeah, for sure.
And also that's also very subjective as well. Each one of us experience food and responses to substances in a different way.
Yeah.
It's really important to work with someone, to have a journal, to realize what activates me, what makes me feel better, what makes me feel worse. What do I do when I eat something or I do something that is not good for me?
Yeah.
And that's just one aspect. These are the cognitive and behavioral aspect of the symptoms.
Yeah.
And later on, in at some point or another, in therapy, with the assistance of a therapist, one needs to understand what are the root causes of that.
Right.
What is this pain or this hole there that I'm trying to fill with something, with whatever else it is, that makes me feel numb or better for a few minutes, for a few seconds, for a few days. What is this behavior that I am replacing in order not to feel this or that?
Okay. The cognitive behavioral resolution stage 3, that sounds like it's a self-reflective, self-awareness project, so to speak, then.
Mm-hmm.
And getting to know yourself, and is that a point in time where you're starting to identify triggers as well?
Yes, and these are the toolboxes that you take with you from therapy.
Right.
It's yours, and it's individualized, and you try it out again and again and again every week. It's a part of therapy, and you need to come back with responses and self-reflection. And the more you know about yourself and the way that you or I respond to certain situations, the more we're able not to let the instinctual part of the brain take over.
Okay, and yeah, great. So that in being stuck in that instinctual part is what I experience as PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or post-trauma response.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. So, and again, we've already touched on the fact that this is a dynamic process between grounding, psychoeducation, cognitive behavioral resolutions, and then resiliency building is stage 4.
Yeah. Resiliency building, it starts from the beginning, from grounding. It's working on reconnecting and connecting to resources that emerged or existed before the trauma.
Okay.
Many people in certain settings that I've worked with in Africa or in Asia feel that they don't have that. People that experience prolonged exposure to stress or trauma for several years. And then this is where I use the expressive arts, imaginal space, to create this space and to build from it. And just as well as one has a kind of an imaginal basket of this suffering and hard and difficulties experiences, then we create this imaginal space of a basket of resources that even if one is suffering, as I said before, they needed to experience, to endure a lot of pain. You need to have a lot of resources to deal with that. Even if you think you're not dealing with it, somehow you have, because you have not died.
Okay.
You're here.
Yeah.
And that is strength. And from that, we build on more and more and more gains and experiences and positive experiences that happens. Even the fact that you ask for help is a positive experience. And even the fact that you keep coming back, something keeps you coming back, something good is happening, even if it's not pleasurable, joyful, or what we see in Hollywood kind of happiness. These are micro kind of resources that we're putting in the basket of resiliency building, and we're growing it and growing it. So at some point or another, it will scale even, or even more.
And the imaginal space that you mentioned, it's what I understand it to be is putting out there before ourselves where we want to go.
Sometimes imaginal space comes from a psychodrama technique, or it's not actually technique. It's one of the aspects of psychodrama is building spontaneity using what Moreno used to call star plus reality.
Okay.
When I use star plus reality, it's a little bit difficult for people, so I use imaginal space because it's easier for people to remember that. Which is a realm. It's a kind of a space that we are working with the clients on a very spontaneous mode. And we are acting, reenacting, or creating in that imagination space a scene that happened, or happened yesterday, or we want to happen.
Okay.
And if we don't have these resources, we can use the imaginal space to create. How would that be?
Right.
How would we feel having these resources? Some people have resistance to that, which is where they are. So we meet the clients where they are, and we take it from there.
I find it very interesting based on your model. In my own experience of having not had the information, this is basically how I've looked at myself anyway, as I've gone along. Not having the information I needed when the trauma struck, and then not having the inner resources to process it even. And that this process is about building that up, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The action
and it's ongoing.
Go ahead.
It's an ongoing work.
Yes.
Any therapist that promise fast cures, there are symptoms reduction kind of wonderful therapeutic and therapies out there, CBT, DBT, EMDR, PE. When it works, it's wonderful. But these are symptoms reduction therapeutic aspects of trauma therapy or trauma integration. Minimizing symptoms is wonderful when it's possible, and it really makes life easier.
Yes.
But it's not really trauma integration.
No, it isn't.
It needs to be more holistic than that to get to trauma integration.
Right. So your approach is a mind, body, spirit, biopsychosocial approach in its entirety.
Yeah, well, it's not necessarily because it's my approach. It's because this is what I have learned as a trauma survivor myself, and working with people that experience trauma in many different contexts around the world. I see that I was trying to understand two things: why people withdraw. Why does people go back to the same symptoms again and again and again and again, or different symptom? And the second question was, what takes people out of withdrawal? What needs to happen to move away from there?
Uh-huh.
And then what is trauma integration, and what moves us away from withdrawal to integration? So these are the questions that I asked myself in the 10 years that I was working on this, and somehow I did get some answers.
Yes.
They're not absolute. Again, it's very subjective matter. We're not talking about specific in sciences here.
Right.
But in most cases, I did see it work.
Yep. That's something that I picked up when I did the interview with Dr. Bercelli too. Is I think we get stuck out here in the world anyway, thinking that this is a linear process, and it is not a linear process, is it?
No, it's spiral and cyclic at the same time. We never go back exactly to where we were.
No.
We somehow spiral up or down.
Right.
And we're in constant movement, even if it really feels, oh, I'm back again to the same place that I used to be, or how it's disappointing to feel that you're back there, but you're not.
Yes.
You still gained all this wonderful or complicated or whatever else you want to define experiences that you have experienced between the last time that you were there.
Right.
And these are yours, and you have done this type of work.
Yeah.
And you take it with you and you put it in somewhere in your system. And our job as clinicians is to help you find a door, a window, any kind of crack that will give you access to that, and to provide as many creative solutions as possible or interventions as possible that we can to give you the tools to get access to these resources.
And it seems to me with the individualized approach like this too, that you're able to, as a clinician, then help the individual through a more natural process as opposed to a linear, generic, laid out plan. Correct?
I don't know. I think all clinicians, all trauma therapists wants to do the same thing. They want to help.
Yeah.
And even if their model is 1, 2, 3, or I think that each one of us is really convinced that what we're doing is the right thing for our clients.
For sure.
And for some it really works, and for some it doesn't. I was always fascinated with the people that this doesn't work and this doesn't work and this doesn't work, and why do we need to say that, okay, only this would work, or only this would work? Why can't we just try all these things that work on many different other people and combine them all and provide this education for clinicians so they have this huge toolbox that they can but when the time is right, you say, okay, so this person really needs this type of approach and this person needs this type of approach, and not just to come and say that my approach is this and that's it.
Yes. The more resources that the clinician has to draw from, the more opportunity there is to find the right fit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the action stage 5.
Yeah, taking action is the stage that we can mostly do that's in therapy. These are the moments that someone is taking a conscious choice to re-engage with the trauma.
Okay.
And if it's someone like me, I'm using expressive therapist modalities, then we will work with embodied approaches and psychodrama and a lot of movement and what I call mindful expansion, which is a certain kind of way to help us reconnect to our bodies in ways that when we feel expansion, we continue the movement. When we don't, we pause. And excuse me.
Yeah.
And other people would use different modalities. I don't think it really matters. I think that if you're a talk therapist and it works for you, for the client, great.
Yeah.
So in that action, you will talk and narrate and use whatever it is that will work for that client to take this conscious decision to say, okay, I have done this and I've done this and I know this and I know this about myself, and these are my triggers and these are my vulnerabilities, these are my strengths,
Yeah.
And now I want to take all of these together and do even a symbolic act, a symbolic ritual would be so significant for someone to do that.
Yeah.
All of these acts accumulate to the resources and resiliency building part of ourselves, and even out the suffering of the injury to the strength that comes with the injury.
Excellent. So it in the action stage too, then I would see it going through all the other stages back to grounding. If it was a storytelling talk therapy session, for instance.
Yeah, well, that is actually you see, I'm working with two different six stages models.
Okay.
One is a theoretical one.
Yes.
Which is the 6 stages of trauma.
Okay.
Which really provide a client with what is trauma, what happened to us, and what are the stages that needs to take place to move ahead from that, which is the event took place, and then there is withdrawal, and then we provide the information, we take action, and there is trauma integration. This is not a linear model.
Yes.
And we can move between the stages all the time.
Right.
But this framework I found very valuable for people. It's very simple, it's easy for people to remember, and that is the theoretical part.
Okay.
So in the action part, we go back to this this 6 stages, and we one by one go through them, and if like the person and the therapist already know each other, so they can identify where is the client. And then we, like for instance, if someone is still in withdrawal, or someone is in action, or someone's in integration, so let's say if someone feels that they're really in integration, so we would work on some kind of using imaginal space on where like who am I today? What is the ritual that is needed? What is the scene that needs to be created to make me feel the way I want to feel?
Right.
And the way I feel comfortable feeling. It's not a push to be happy or a push to go anywhere. It's where the client is, and they might want to stay where they are. Okay, sure. So what is the scene that I want to build right now that talks about where I am right now?
Okay.
Where I want to be. How would it feel? Let's say someone is in withdrawal.
Yeah.
Some people really want to create a scene or create a kind of a symbolic act or a vignette or of how would my body feel like without this.
Okay.
Most people, when they do that, they see, I don't want to be without this. This actually gives me something.
Right. Looking at the other 6 stages here that you mentioned just now, like you've got 2 different.
This one is the stages of trauma integration. These are stages, and this is steps.
Yes.
I know it's complicated, and both are 6 steps and 6 stages, but these are the same framework. One is the therapeutic approach, and the other one is the theoretical framework.
Okay. So what I like about this framework that I'm looking at right now, talking about routine as systems of the body functioning normally and routinely. It's the expression of what we would think we are like when we're okay. The event then is the trauma itself, which can send us then into withdrawal. And
it sends us immediately, like very soon. As soon as the traumatic experience is over, we are in withdrawal. Some of us, even as I mentioned, the responses, the instinctual responses, could immediately send us to withdrawal, which is as it mentioned, it's a survival response that can last for weeks, for months, for years, and for some people a lifetime.
Right. And awareness then is to open us up.
It's the first key.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's to open us up to what has actually happened to us, correct? And then educate us. Yeah. And then the action stage would likely lead us into the other set of 6 that we were talking about.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the path to full integration of the trauma. Okay, gotcha.
And again, it's really important. Although I have studied this particular approach in a six sessions model.
Uh-huh.
The sessions were 1 hour and a half to 2 hours.
Okay.
And they took, for some of the participants, they participated every week. Some came every 2 weeks. And the last session was a month after the fifth session. And when I tried to measure the effectiveness of that, there was a reason why I wanted some short-term intervention. And it was effective. It was demonstrated to show effectiveness in reducing stress symptoms and increasing compassion satisfaction, which is the ability for people to enjoy what they do.
Uh-huh.
And the reason I created a short-term intervention is because where I lived in Africa, there is just no money for people to go to therapy, and there is so much need, and much more need than anyone can actually provide. I was the only therapist at the time in the tiny country, and so I wanted to come up with interventions that later on, when I moved to the Philippines in Asia, I realized that, and even there, where there's millions of people in need,
Yeah.
that and even here in this country, in the US, there is much more people in need than there are actually therapists that can respond, or people that can actually afford to go to therapy on an ongoing basis for a year, for 2 years, for 6 months. It's expensive.
Yes.
So, so the 2 times that I measured the effectiveness of the ETI approach was in short interventions, and the results were good.
Uh-huh.
They will never be as good as therapy one-on-one, or therapy in a group that is proper, and you have at least, I don't know, 12 sessions. If it's a group setting, 12 sessions of 3 hours, then you can really see something really really significant that can happen.
Right.
So this is not really therapy. This is psychosocial support kind of intervention. But when I worked with my own clients in my own clinic with this type of holistic approach and the 6 stages on both, with people that came and saw me for several months, for 6 months, for a year,
Uh-huh.
then I hear from some of my clients every once in a while, and they're able to sustain themselves.
Right.
And they do contact me for sometimes, like I did have a few that contact me for a Skype session here or there.
Uh-huh.
And what's wonderful about experiential work is that we can always go back to that and say, remember then we did this and this and this happened and this happened. So let's think about what happened right now and how can we go back to these experiences that you already experienced with me in the room.
Okay. It's a recollection, like a reminding sessions then that you could do and follow up via Skype is what you're hinting at there.
Yeah, I did. Most of my clients eventually, expert kind of life. I was working as an aide personnel, so clients move to different countries.
Yeah.
And most of these countries did not have or don't have proper trauma therapy. So yeah, I would do Skype therapy. I did actually psychodrama in Skype, over Skype as well.
Oh, wow.
It's far from ideal.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's what it is.
Yeah, I see value in it. I see telemental health and video conferencing mental health therapeutic approach is probably going to be a savior for some people. Where in Canada we've got a Northern First Nations community, for instance, that it's very difficult for them to access any kind of one-on-one therapy. Mm-hmm. So that's a wonderful offering for sure.
It is. I still believe, like I do have, every once in a while people ask me to work with them on Skype, and if I can only see someone for a day, minimum a day, of a few hours, so I can learn what is the dynamics between us, who is this person, and learn a little bit more about them. It makes life so much easier to afterwards do Skype therapy. There's some kind of a connection that I personally believe that takes place between two people in a therapy room that is really valuable, and it's very difficult to achieve
Oh,
over Skype.
yeah. No, I agree with you. The the trust that's required between a client and a therapist is just, it can't be underrated. And getting to know each other and getting to know, allowing your therapist to get to know all of you, because that's the only way, really. I mean, in a relationship that I've initially had with therapists, if I wasn't open with them, how the heck are they going to be able to help me?
Yeah, but also on Skype you can do that. Not again, I'm saying personally, I prefer the one-on-one or face-to-face.
Yeah.
But I have done Skype as well. Then what you do is you ask them, show me where you are, show me your room. I mean, your setting.
Yeah.
I'll show you the setting that I'm in. It's really important. Where am I sitting?
Yeah.
We're meeting on this day and this day. So you somehow adapt yourself to the situation, which again is somewhat valuable.
Oh yeah.
Whatever works, it doesn't matter. I believe that if something works for someone, that's what matters.
Right, and go with what's shining in the relationship in terms of helping people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the integration process itself, then, I'm not going to try to hint that there's a completion to this, and I really don't. I don't really think there should be.
No, well, that's why it's integration, because it accumulates. It's every time the integration makes you yourself with another part that is integrated in the whole.
Right, and there's a difference too, between typical human stress and trauma.
There is, although the responses are very, very similar, and people that are exposed to stress on an ongoing basis are very likely to feel very similarly to someone that experienced trauma.
Okay.
And since most of us have our own stories, and at some point or another we will lose someone or something will happen, because life happens to everyone.
For sure.
Then if you add up to this a very stressful job, a very stressful environment, being stressed for money for a long time, for your family, for people that you love, for people that are far away, for things like that, this is also accumulative. So stress responses are very, biologically, they're the same as trauma. They're just not intensified at that moment.
Right.
But it is a response that is instinctual, and the more we are experienced to that, the less we are responsible to our responses.
Right.
The more we're exposed to stress, I meant.
I like well, there's the title of his book, actually. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so when the body says no.
Yeah.
That's really what's happening with an accumulated stress issue. Your body is giving you warning signs all along the way.
Yeah.
If you don't listen to them, you'll take yourself out.
But we need to be educated to listen to that.
Absolutely.
It doesn't come to us. I mean, for some of us at least, maybe it comes more naturally. But we need help these are the CBRs. We need help to find out what it is, how this and that, everything that I've described before.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. Is there anything you want to close up with?
Thanks for this opportunity. I always enjoy talking about this type of work, and I appreciate what you're trying to do.
I
think it's very valuable, and I think that, like all of us, you have your own journey, and I honor it, and I think that the fact that you're authentic about it is very valuable for many, many people that are struggling and find it really hard to admit that they do.
Yeah, I've like we've talked privately before, and I've hinted to you what's going on in Canada right now politically, and we've made some headway in the last little while that's just phenomenal. But what we're most concerned about, and I don't know, survivors can send the message, and we're trying to, but people do reach a state, without right interventions, without right kind of help, with abandonment of employers, and, basically thrown to the curb by society with this stuff. For whatever reason, the stigma stuff takes us to a point of almost no return, and there's so many people choosing to end their lives.
I know.
And it's an unnecessary step if we consider that the experience of trauma can actually be a growth process.
Yeah, I think that, it's a very complicated situation. Also over here in the U.S., there's the amount of soldiers that are committing suicide, and in other countries as well. Yeah, it's not something that can be ignored,
No.
and it's very easy for the majority of us. And I'm not excluding myself. I'm also a person to focus on what's here,
Yes.
and what we see, and ignore the things that we cannot see, or
Yeah. I don't know if you've noticed it or not. Like other therapists that I've talked to certainly have said so. The growth in understanding and awareness of trauma and PTSD specifically, since folks have been coming back from Iraq, Afghanistan, it's taken off in a way that is unprecedented. And I don't know if there's talk too that neuroscience is contributing to the understanding and growth of the issue, but I think it's more about people being more and more willing to perhaps open up about the reality of it.
yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. I'm originally from Israel, and yeah, we growing up in a country that is exposed to trauma from almost its existence, from
Right.
its existence. I mean, from the country standpoint. I mean, from my own personal experience.
Yeah.
And being any person in that context, whether you're Israeli or Palestinian, we're all exposed to trauma. And gratefully, there are wonderful resources and trauma approaches that are coming from that part of the world.
Right.
So I was always aware of that. My mom is a therapist. I've always been exposed to people that were familiar.
Yeah.
Ironically, not enough, I mean, in that context, but I think that it taught me to assume that if people are coming from a war zone or from any area that experience communal trauma,
Yes.
then some kind of impact will take place on everyone. Does that mean that everyone will experience PTSD? No, absolutely not.
Right.
Does that mean that everyone needs to be somehow educated about what has been going on with them? Absolutely.
Yes, for sure. It's like a dropping a pebble into a pond. The ripple effect is incredibly vast, isn't it?
But it's the same. But there are enough traumas in this part of the world
For sure.
that is very much present, but again, not really addressed.
Right.
I guess that's for another podcast, but it's definitely here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the personal
thank you,
supports
Darren.
too. I've so much appreciated the last while having people on my next to me on the, at least the shoulders away that get this stuff. It's difficult to talk about, and it's been a blessing.
Great. I'm very happy to be able to be here.
Okay. Take good care.
Thanks, you too.
All right, we'll be in touch.
Okay.
Bye-bye.